Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It was probably the most terrifying walk we've ever done.
A too close encounter with flames and smoke. Wildfire officials warn the next few days could be very challenging in BC.
We are going to see lightning. We saw 1,300 lightning strikes yesterday.
Plus,
every day we see the real effects of climate change in our home. Glaciers are melting. The oceans and rivers are getting warmer.
Ottawa pledges tens of millions of dollars for conservation projects in BC and beyond to try to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Experts say it needs to move much faster. And
the big picture answer is hazard mapping is crucial to make decisions that affect everyone.
We take you deep below parts of the Lower Mainland as researchers map what a massive earthquake may look like in our region.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Wildfire officials have a message for you. The next 3 days in BC could be very tough. The BC Wildfire Service says there were 1,300 lightning strikes yesterday alone, and they sparked fires, especially in the southeast. As Corey Bullock reports from Cranbrook, it was a too close call for a group of hikers.
I just said, I think we have a problem.
Laurel Swinyard is glad she made the decision to go home on Tuesday night after watching the Mount Morrow fire break out in top of the World Provincial Park northeast of Cranbrook.
It was probably the most terrifying walk we've ever done.
Swinyard and her friends were hiking at Fish Lake, a popular backpacking location, when they heard thunder roll in. Just minutes later, they knew a wildfire had started.
As we were walking out, you could look back and see the red glow, which, made the decision like, yeah, that definitely was a smart call.
The Mount Morrow fire is one of many blazes that have sparked in the Southeast Fire Centre in recent days, leaving a thick haze over Cranbrook and other cities. Wildfire experts say they expect more fires to begin.
We are going to see lightning. We saw 1,300 lightning strikes yesterday, many of which started fires in the Southeast Fire Centre, and we'll pick up more today.
Chapman says the lightning caused a cluster of fires to start in the West Kootenay near Nelson after a weather system moved north from the United States. He says crews are preparing to fight them, but
the conditions are extreme right now with the dryness that we've experienced in this province over the course of the last 2 weeks and the anticipated week ahead. All of our suppression efforts will be challenged. We need to get on these fires quickly and try to get them suppressed and into being held as quickly as we can.
The relentless heat and crispy conditions are prompting yet another plea from the provincial government.
Please take the time to make sure you, your family, and your households are ready. Be fire smart. Ensure your insurance is up to date.
Being prepared and vigilant, just as Swinyard and her friends were.
We made it out in an hour 45, which is about half an hour quicker than we went in. So it was pretty fast. And we sang at the top of our lungs for 2 straight hours, and it was not good.
The BC Wildfire Service is forecasting another 7 days of hot weather in the interior. Corey Bullock, CBC News, Cranbrook.
Now, as the number of wildfires in BC continues to grow, so do the evacuation orders and alerts. Our Janella Hamilton joins us now with the numbers. Janella.
Dan, there are more than 230 fires burning in BC. 95 started in the past 24 hours. The greatest concern is the Shetland Creek fire in the Thompson-Nicola region. It's burning just north of Spence's Bridge. We can see it here on the map, and has ballooned to nearly 50 square kilometers after merging with a nearby fire. This has now become a wildfire of note, the only one in BC right now. Its growth has prompted an evacuation order for 85 properties in the Venables Valley, an agricultural area west of Kamloops, affecting more than 120 people. People there were told to leave Wednesday night and are now being directed to an emergency Services Reception Center in Cache Creek. As well, the Cooks Ferry Indian Band near Spence's Bridge has expanded its evacuation order. The band's chief says several families have been impacted by the Shetland fire, but the extent of the damage is still unclear. And over in the Kootenays, lightning is believed to be responsible for another cluster of small fires burning near the village of Silverton on both sides of Slocan Lake. People in 11 rural properties have been ordered to leave immediately. The regional district says there is a reception center set up for evacuees at the Royal Canadian Legion in the village of Slocan. There is also growing concern for the northern half of BC. That region is expected to get significant lightning now into Friday. The BC Wildfire Service says it will be a challenging 72 hours ahead. Heat warnings remain in place for much of the province's interior and north, further fueling the dry conditions. Dan?
Janella Hamilton reporting for us. Thanks very much, Janella. With temperatures surging this summer across the province, BC Children's Hospital is again warning families to keep an eye on little kids, especially near windows, balconies, and the water. Already, 12 children have been treated in the hospital for injuries linked to window and balcony falls, and 3 others have been treated for near or accidental drownings. Last year, 14 kids were treated for falls, 13 for drownings. One ER doctor has some timely advice for guardians and parents.
Move furniture, planters, boxes away from windows so that young children can't climb up and then topple out. The other thing you can do is secure your window so that it can't open more than 10 centimeters. This can be with a window lock. It's also important to remember not to rely upon a screen for safety.
And when it comes to water, Dr. Gilly says parents and guardians ought to remain within arm's length of their little ones and make sure kids are wearing proper fitting flotation devices in and around the water. Let's bring in Darius Madavi now with a first look at the weather and what we can expect over the next few days.
Right, so we still have these heat warnings in place, Dan, so those risks that are associated with the heat are not going away anytime soon, especially if you're in the interior where temperatures are going to be coming up again as we get into this weekend. Now, this is showing us last night from around 10 p.m. or 8 p.m. to around 4 a.m. Overnight. You can see lots of lightning activity happening down in the southeast. This is one of the areas that we're really going to be watching over the next few days as well. Very prone to lightning activity, and one of the places we'll expect to see it, as well as up here in the central interior. We saw a little bit of lightning activity, a little bit less intense, but still present and still risky. Now, instead, let's look at just over the last couple hours, where things haven't been quite as exciting, let's say, as they were last night, but we're still getting into those hours when we saw the main action of the night happen. So we still could get lots of lightning activity in many parts of the interior. If we zoom in here, you can see just the beginnings of a little lazy cell popping up, and you can see at the beginning very little lightning activity along with it, but then just in the last few minutes, actually, some of that more lightning activity really starts to pop up. So that's something that we're going to be watching even throughout this hour in terms of that lightning activity, because the fire danger remains stubbornly high and is going to be for the next few days. If anything, it'll probably climb again from here, a little bit lower in the southern interior than it has been the last couple of days, but it will probably rise again, especially as temperatures start to come back up into the 40s in many places this weekend. Lots of wind is also expected in some areas, particularly in parts of the north. We're going to have a minor front sort of pass through here. I don't know if you can call it a front, but it passes through here and then bring some lightning activity, likely a little bit of precipitation, but also some really strong winds. In terms of proper precipitation, really the only place we're going to see that is up in the north. So don't be up in the northwest specifically. So don't expect too much relief coming that way. And Dan, later this hour, we'll take a closer look at those temperatures that we can expect throughout BC.
Okay, Darius, we're looking forward to it. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Mounties say 2 people have been killed and 1 person is in hospital with serious injuries after a plane crash in Tofino. The RCMP says it happened on the runway at the Long Beach Airport just before 1 in the afternoon. It says it appears the engine of a small 6-seater aircraft may have caught fire during takeoff. 1 of the passengers was pulled from the plane and rushed to hospital. The other 2 victims died at the scene. Police, the coroner, and the Transportation Safety Board are now trying to figure out what may have caused that. The federal government was in Metro Vancouver earlier in the day to announce tens of millions of dollars for conservation projects across the country. As Belle Puri shows us, the money will be spent on an effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
BC's beauty is striking, but so is the evidence of climate change.
Flooding, more frequent and intense extreme weather events, higher than normal temperatures, droughts, and longer and more devastating wildfire seasons.
Those are some of the reasons why the federal government has announced just over $89 million for 10 conservation projects in 6 provinces.
Specifically in British Columbia, we're announcing almost $50 million for 3 major nature conservation initiatives.
Projects will support natural carbon removals and help protect habitats in multiple locations, including Vancouver Island, the southern interior, and northern BC. $37 million will go to the BC Parks Foundation to conserve up to 40 square kilometres of private grasslands, forests, and wetlands.
With the funds that are being announced today, we have already protected 30 beautiful places in British Columbia.
The rest of the money will be shared between the Newhart Nation and the Nature Trust of BC.
This new partnership has allowed us to purchase an area of high biodiversity land larger than Stanley Park.
Every day we see the real effects of climate change in our home. Glaciers are melting, the oceans and rivers are getting warmer.
The announcement, according to one of Canada's oldest conservation groups, is a relatively small part of a larger commitment. By 2030, the federal government aims to protect at least 30% of Canada's lands and waters.
The interim objective, 25% of lands and waters protected by 2025, is coming up. 2025 is next year. The government so far, by its own accounting, has only protected 13.7% of lands and 15.5% of waters. This is well off course.
Experts say it appears the government is moving in the right direction, but has to accelerate these types of announcements if it wants to save the climate and the natural world. Belle Puri, CBC News, Vancouver.
The Okanagan Humane Society is facing a surge of abandoned pets. They're expecting to have 60% more animals in their care than last year.
Some people on fixed incomes who have had their animals for 2-3 years since COVID are finding that that's just something that they cannot afford.
The Society now has 300 orphan pets, which has doubled in the previous year. Almost 200 of them are kittens. The OHS says inflation and housing policies could be behind why people are giving up their animals. It notes spaying and neutering costs have also increased, and many people are finding it hard to find pet-friendly housing. BC Conservative leader John Rustad has released his party's healthcare platform ahead of the fall election. Rustad promises a drastic overhaul of a healthcare system he says is in crisis. That includes guaranteed wait times for things like surgeries and cancer treatment. And if those wait times aren't met, he says the province would pay for the patient to be treated outside BC.
As a patient, when you're looking for services, if we are not able to deliver that within the acceptable time here within British Columbia, then we will make sure that we arrange those services outside of our borders.
Rustad also says he would hire back healthcare workers who were fired because they refused to get vaccinated against COVID-19, while also increasing reliance on private medical clinics. One doctor, though, cautions against the use of for-profit care.
I have very little faith that the private sector, investor-owned private for-profit facilities can provide efficient care. Because at the end of the day, if you're delivering the same service, but you have to carve off a good 5 to 8% to go to your shareholders, there's just no way that you can deliver that at cost.
BC United leader Kevin Falcon, meanwhile, held his own healthcare announcement in Prince George, where he accused the Conservatives of copying his party's idea on private healthcare. BC's provincial election is set for October 19th. As we told you Wednesday night, 2 people have died after drinking plant-based beverages contaminated with Listeria. They were among 12 people who got sick after drinking the products. The CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick has more.
A little over a week after some almond, oat, and coconut beverages were recalled because of Listeria contamination, news that 2 people have died because of the infections. Health officials confirmed the deaths were in Ontario, but would not provide any other details. There have been 10 confirmed cases of listeriosis in the province, 1 in Quebec and 1 in Nova Scotia. It will be a challenge to determine the exact size and cause of the outbreak. One of the cases dates back to last August. Several people got sick in June.
It is a bit like a crime case. Is that the longer you leave it, the more the trail goes cold.
Some people may experience mild symptoms of fever, diarrhea, and vomiting and never know they were infected with the bacteria. People who are pregnant or elderly are more at risk of severe illness. It can take weeks for symptoms to show up after consuming contaminated food.
Because this can have such a gap between the time you ate the thing and by the time you got sick, that it can be harder for them to trace where the contamination came from.
The beverage manufacturer Danone Canada says it's working with authorities to investigate the outbreak. It calls the deaths devastating and said their sincere sympathies go out to the families and loved ones during this difficult time. More than a dozen Silk and Great Value brand products have been pulled from store shelves across Canada. In 2008, there was a Listeria outbreak at a Maple Leaf food plant linked to deli meats. 22 people died. That outbreak prompted changes to the food safety system, but experts say there's no foolproof way to prevent and detect infection.
Every time you take a food and process it, you increase the chance of bacteria getting into it.
As investigators search for the cause of this outbreak, consumers who purchase the products are advised to throw them out or return them to a store. A full list of the affected products is on the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's website. Megan Fitzpatrick, CBC.
For years, we've been told to prepare for the big one, a massive earthquake that will bring destruction to the Lower Mainland. While the damage will be severe, not every part of this region will be hit the same way. Our Darius Madavi went out with some researchers who are creating detailed mapping that outlines the risks at a much more detailed level.
Here in Kits, we can see the bedrock Vancouver is built on. These layers give us an idea of how an earthquake would be felt right here. But not all neighborhoods are created equal. So for the first time, a team of researchers has set out to study and map what we can expect from a quake across Metro Vancouver.
We're performing an active seismic array. We hammer at one end, and that sends seismic energy into the ground. And we use a line of geophones to measure the speed at which that wave travels between the geophones.
This paints a picture of what's happening below the ground, up to a depth of 30 meters. It's the current standard for building codes across the country. But Sherry Molnar and her team are going deeper with another method.
The testing we're doing today, we hope to see to about 60 meters. And we do this testing at many sites, over 100 sites in Metro Vancouver so far.
By setting up a ring of seismometers a specific distance apart, they can measure the tiny vibrations that are ever present underfoot. These can be caused by natural phenomena like ocean waves, or they can come from humans through traffic or construction, or jumping. Together with other data they've collected, that allows them to understand what's happening up to a kilometer beneath the surface.
And that's bigger and beyond what the building code would normally require.
The team now has tens of thousands of readings to create maps that show the hazards, and it's far more specific than what we've seen in the past. The maps themselves are fairly technical, but they're packed with valuable information. Take this one, which shows the amount of shaking over a certain threshold that different areas can expect to experience at ground level, given all the earthquakes we can expect in a certain time period, in this case 475 years, measured on a relative scale, from reduced shaking to considerably more. Similar maps were created for different periods or speeds of seismic waves. That can tell you the shaking expected for buildings of certain heights. For instance, slower, long-period waves will affect taller buildings more strongly. This map, for instance, uses a period that gives you an idea of the shaking we can expect for 20-story buildings. Molnar's team also created maps for secondary threats, including liquefaction.
And liquefaction is when the ground is shaken so hard and it's got usually sandy material and water in the pores between them. When you shake it really hard, that water gets percolated up towards surface and the soil kind of acts like a liquid. You would see, say, the front end of the building tilting forward. You would see also things that are buried under the ground, like pipes or manhole covers.
So why do these effects vary so much across Metro Vancouver? As seismic waves travel through bedrock away from the epicenter of a quake, they lose strength. But when they pass into more loosely packed sediment, they can re-amplify, gaining some of that strength back and doing more damage. This effect is even more pronounced in wet, sandy, or muddy areas.
So one neighborhood would experience the shaking differently from another neighborhood, based on whether or not the subsurface ground conditions have changed.
There are three main categories: bedrock, which is the base and forms the mountains; ice age sediments, well compacted from glaciers running over them; and modern sediments, which are softer and were deposited more recently. Each presents different risk factors. For instance, the sandstone bedrock is very close to the surface in Kits, so quakes won't be amplified very much. But just a few kilometers south, the bedrock is buried under a layer of ice age sediment, and that can be riskier terrain. Meanwhile, areas by the Fraser River Delta, such as Richmond, are built on deep layers of looser, modern sediment. That can mean more dangers of destruction when an earthquake occurs. These maps will be made available to the public, but it's important to understand what they're telling you and what they're not. These maps show the hazards for different areas, what we can expect to experience in a given time frame. They don't tell us the risk. To understand that, you have to layer on the human element, the infrastructure, and preparedness. Take the West End, for instance, where these new maps suggest the shaking hazard is relatively low. But Molnar says the risk may actually be higher than some areas built on looser ground, because many of the older buildings weren't built to the seismic safety standards that modern developments are. Compare that to Richmond, where some types of hazard may be higher, but the buildings are new and up to code, lowering the risk.
Hazard mapping is crucial to make decisions that affect everyone. And so emergency managers, our land use planners, need to anticipate and make decisions on disaster mitigation in their regions.
Earthquakes are by far the most unpredictable kind of natural disaster. But here in BC, they're also inevitable. So knowing how and where to build resilient infrastructure is essential. And research like this is what makes that possible. Darius Madavi, CBC News, Vancouver.
Still to come, with the Paris Olympics around the corner, we take a look back at the history of doping at the Games and how it's changed over the decades. That story's next. It is Throwback Thursday, and that means we dive into our vast CBC archives. With the Paris Summer Olympics beginning next week, we're taking a look at the history of doping at the Games. The scandal around former Canadian sprinting champion Ben Johnson rocked this country back in 1988. He won the men's 100-meter sprint at the Seoul Olympics with a record time of 9.79 seconds. But just 3 days later, the Olympic Doping Control Center found traces of stanozolol, an anabolic steroid, in his urine. Take a look.
Disqualification of this competitor from the Games of the 24th Olympiad in Seoul.
It was what everyone dreaded. 3 days ago, the world watched the fastest 100 meters in history. 4 men ran under 10 seconds. Ben Johnson smashed his own world record. He was the biggest star of these games. At an early morning meeting, even International Olympic Committee officials seemed stunned by their discovery.
We ask you to have all the media waiting in the lobby, so please take everybody down in the lobby.
Now the gold medal goes to Johnson's arch rival, 4-time Olympic gold medal winner Carl Lewis, whose statements after Saturday's race sounded like sour grapes. Today, they sound prophetic.
That race was shocking. I just don't know how he does it, or whether he gets a hypnotist or something, but he does something to stimulate him in the finals.
Lost 6 pounds. What the IOC says Johnson did was to take a drug called stanozolol, an anabolic steroid, a drug that helps build strength, but it's a risk to those who take it.
This is one of the most dangerous anabolic steroids known because its structure is such that its effect on the liver can lead to a number of disturbances.
Drugs are supposed to build muscles, and Johnson has always been known for his strength and his explosive starts. In its argument to the IOC, Canadian officials implied the drug may have been slipped to Johnson after the race and before his test. The IOC doesn't believe it.
The steroid profile, however, is not consistent with such a claim.
The gold medalist, Ben Johnson, Canada.
So Johnson forfeits his gold medal, he forfeits his reputation, and a Canadian official says he forfeits government training money for life.
The federal government withdraws all financial support from that athlete for life. That's the current policy.
The IOC's decision probably will be appealed, but the repercussions have begun and they'll hurt. A drug-tainted athlete can be hard to market, and at least one company that uses Johnson has agreed to withdraw its ads. But even more serious, unusual for a first-time offender, but it's possible that Johnson could be banned from amateur competition for life. The man in the middle of the storm left Seoul this morning to return home to Canada. And in spite of the huge crush of reporters, he refused comment. 3 days ago, he was being called the fastest human in the world with a fabulous future. For now, the future's on hold. Tom Kennedy, CBC News at the Seoul Olympics.
Fast forward to this year's Olympics, and doping is still an issue. Take China, for example, whose swimmers are getting tested for drugs at least 8 times before the Games begin next week. This after controversy in 2021 when 11 of that country's athletes tested positive for banned heart medication. Joining us for more on this are Catherine Carstairs and Aidan Hughes from the University of Guelph in Ontario. They study alcohol and drug history and the state of doping today. We appreciate you being here. Aidan, I'll start with you. How has doping changed over the years as you see it?
It hasn't changed much, but it's changed a lot. The economic motivations for athletes to dope has remained rather consistent, with the Olympics constantly pushing the envelope. But in terms of pharmacokinetics, it's changed a lot. There's new drugs in the market. You're not going to see as many athletes being caught using anabolic steroids anymore, just because they're so easily detectable through urine. But you do, at the same time, see a lot of athletes using what I would call bioidentical hormones, and they're microdosing them. So things that are naturally occurring in the body, they're microdosing them to evade detection, essentially. These are things like growth hormone, EPO, and testosterone, because that can kind of skirt under testing.
Mm-hmm. Not as obvious. Catherine, what do you think are the biggest challenges right now for athletes and regulatory bodies facing around doping?
I mean, I think the challenge is, as Aidan mentioned, it's far more drugs on the market. So to some extent, the challenges have become even greater because there's, a much wider array of substances to potentially test for than there were in the 1980s. On the other hand, the testing's also become a lot more sophisticated, and it's far more frequent than it was in the 1980s. But I think that's provoked new concerns about athletes' privacy, right? I mean, they have once you've decided to become that level of elite athlete, you have very little privacy, which I think is a concern. And I think also the testers are still always behind the athletes, right? There are very extensive networks in place for distributing drugs. And because there's so many of them now, athletes have a wide variety of choice of products and ever greater sophistication of how to use them and how to avoid the testing procedures that are in place. So I guess in some respects, like much of our world has just become more complicated.
Well, just before we wrap up, we appreciate your time. I'll ask this of both of you. Adrian first. Aiden, I should say, what do you expect when it comes to doping at the Paris Games?
Well, I can't really speak to what, how many people or anything like that, but
the general mood, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I mean, the resources are available for doping in terms of athlete biological passports. There's ways to circumvent these tests, and we've put a lot of trust into these organizations. But the fact of the matter is these tests can be beat. And in terms of popular sentiment, I mean, I don't think there's a huge drive from the public anymore as compared to like Ben Johnson to catch these athletes anymore. I think it's become interwoven with the narrative in Olympic sport, questions around people who are natural and redemption arcs when people kind of come back. So I really don't think there's that much of a drive anymore when we compare even back to Lance Armstrong. There's not as much public outrage.
And Catherine, last word to you.
I completely agree with Aiden. I think that the spectacle of doping has just become part of sports entertainment. So yes, we will continue to see lots of stories about doping because they fit perfectly into those narratives of sport, of triumph, despair, endurance. All those themes are just as much there in doping as they are in the actual competition.
Catherine Carstairs and Aidan Hughes from the University of Guelph. We appreciate your time and your expertise. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
For the first time, a woman is now in charge of the Canadian Armed Forces. And with that, she faces massive challenges. That story's next. For the first time ever, the top soldier in the Canadian Armed Forces is now a woman. General Jenny Carignan has taken command as the new Chief of the Defence Staff. She had been in charge of changing the military's culture after a sexual misconduct crisis. As Ashley Burke reports, she assumes command of a military in crisis.
It's a new era.
À la fois le drapeau canadien et l'insigne des Forces armées canadiennes.
General Jenny Carignan making history, taking command of the Canadian Armed Forces.
You are the very first woman to ever become Chief of the Defence Staff, the very first in the G7 and in the G20. You are a role model for all Canadians and for the world.
After more than 3 decades in uniform,
Our new Chief of the Defence Staff.
she's taking on the top job during a tumultuous time.
Today, I can say that I feel ready, poised, and supported.
Canada's outgoing top soldier delivering a serious warning.
Our military history is one of unpreparedness at the outset of war. 1914, 1939, 1950, 2001 are all stark examples. Let's not let that happen again. Urgency is required.
Urgency at a time when experts say the military is not prepared.
The military is in a state of crisis today.
Only 58% of the forces is ready to respond. Almost half the military's equipment isn't serviceable, and there's a massive shortfall in staff.
The crisis in military personnel, there are close to 6,000 positions to fill.
Carignan said her top priority is fixing recruitment and laid out a major commitment to counter threats from China and Russia.
I say we have about 5 years to get us close enough to be ready to counter those long-range type of threat.
It is momentous.
For Canada's first female infantry officer, Carignan taking command broke part of the glass ceiling.
This is going to be a great symbol for young women that their hopes and dreams can happen.
That's not lost on Carignan.
I'm going to get a little bit emotional here. I've done this because I love it.
It's a job, she says, that comes with enormous responsibility.
I get now to lead these fantastic people in very difficult times. It's not going to be easy, folks. I'm telling you, there's nothing that is going to be easy going forward.
And the stakes going forward are high. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Meanwhile, the future of the Canadian Forces celebrated snowbirds is up in the air. The planes used by the Air Force aerobatics team have reached the end of their useful life, and there are safety concerns. And as the CBC's Murray Brewster tells us, the jets are just one item on a growing list of things the military needs to replace.
They have been part of summer in this country for more than half a century. Canada's Snowbird Squadron, flying 1960s-built training jets. A symbol of Canadian pride that's showing its age. CBC News has now learned the aircraft may be retired.
The reality is the Tudor plane is well past its utility. There are even some safety issues that are deeply concerning to me. And I've received assurances that through this flight season that they can manage those safety issues.
The federal government has been warned for decades the Snowbird jets need replacing. Internal reports in 2003 and 2016, obtained by CBC News, said keeping the jets flying presented significant risks. The Air Force recently ordered another upgrade that could keep them flying until 2030. Other Canadian Forces equipment is also rusting out. The Navy's minesweepers were built in the mid-1990s. Defense sources confirmed to CBC News that fleet is also on a list of ships and planes the military is looking at retiring soon. General Wayne Eyre, the country's outgoing Chief of the Defense Staff, in an interview with CBC Radio, says some equipment is simply worn out.
As capability ages out, there's a declining pool of spare parts to be able to keep it going.
We asked the Defense Department for a comprehensive list of what equipment might be retired. It did not respond. But this expert says the upcoming decision is a political problem for Ottawa.
Our allies are seeing that Canada is effectively reducing capabilities because it simply doesn't have the money, the political will, or the human resources.
Both the federal government and the military insist no decisions have been made. Last spring's federal budget set aside $1.9 billion to maintain older fleets. but it's clearly not enough. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
Legendary comedian Bob Newhart has died. Known for his deadpan delivery, he starred in the popular series The Bob Newhart Show, nominated for multiple Emmys and 2 Golden Globes in the 70s. Newhart was also known for his appearances in the holiday movie Elf and on The Big Bang Theory. Newhart became a comedian after starting a career as an accountant. He released his first comedy album in 1960, and it climbed to the top of the Billboard charts. That one and the next one, 3 Grammys. He went on to guest host Johnny Carson's Tonight Show more than 80 times. Newhart died after a short illness. He was 94. Coming up, a modern take on an Inuit knife is drawing criticism. We'll tell you why after this. Our science and climate specialist Darius Madavi joins us now with the province-wide forecast. I'm going to start with the big smoke.
Yes, because we've got a number of air quality advisories in place for parts of BC. You can see that many places in BC are seeing some of that smoke tomorrow. Now, it's worth noting this is the maximum smoke forecast for tomorrow. So this is the most smoke that you would feel. And of course, the darker colors represent more smoke. That's why this area has been under a severe warning for quite a while now. The Northeast is going to continue to see that smoke for quite a while. Here in the rest of BC, especially in the south, it really depends on how exactly those winds play out, whether the inflow or outflow winds. But generally tomorrow may be a little bit smoky in some at points in Vancouver. Depends where you are, and you probably won't see too much of it. It's not going to be like super smoky skies or anything, but you may notice a little whiff in the air at times. Now, across BC, temperatures are remaining stubbornly high. A bit of a reprieve today and tomorrow for some places, but into the weekend, temperatures shoot right back up into the 40s in some places like the Thompson, before maybe as we get into midweek next week, we start to see a little bit of relief for the first time in a long time. As we get into Tuesday and Wednesday, temperatures should start to come down a little bit. Some places in the interior, like Kamloops, seeing their first temperatures sort of at 30 or in the low 30s for the first time in will be probably 2 weeks by that point. So a little bit of relief is probably on the way, so a little bit of good news there. But across the province, for now, we're looking at lots of thunderstorm activity possible tomorrow. I'm going to spend extra time on this map just because you can see how much of the province is seeing a possibility in some places, like up in the Northeast, a probability of seeing a decent amount of thunderstorm activity. So tomorrow's going to be a busy day, lots to keep track of. We'll keep an eye on that. But for here in Vancouver, not likely to see much thunderstorm activity, maybe some parts of the Lower Mainland and the Alpine, but even there, I don't expect to see it. Dan? We're sunny. We're staying sunny.
Okay, Darius, thanks very much.
Thank you.
A modern take on a traditional Inuit knife is facing criticism. As Natalie Pressman explains, Inuit groups argue the curved cutting tool being produced in the U.S. is appropriating their culture and history.
This marketing video advertises a kitchen knife that's good for cutting food into kid-sized bites.
Would have taken me double the amount of time that it would have if I wasn't using the Tot Chop.
I mean, we're the first people in the world to have this shape of a knife.
But those claims by U.S.-based company Tot Chop are false.
They're not an Inuit-owned organization, and they're reproducing our tools to make a profit off of it, right? That's why we're mad.
Oh, there's a picture of it here.
Inuk Ulu artist Ken Mackay and his father-in-law Joe Karatek know them well.
My grandmother made them in the past and kind of inspired me to make them myself as well. Connected me more with my culture.
The ulu was traditionally a woman's knife, still used as a kind of multi-tool.
Again, people's hands are different.
Karatek taught his son-in-law how to craft an ulu. He says it's unfair for Inuit to compete with Southern companies.
Today, it's really hard to protect the interest and integrity of who first designed this.
Tot Chop's website acknowledges the ulu's Arctic indigenous roots, which contradicts its video marketing. CBC News reached out to ask about these mixed messages. It did not respond. But it's not the first time a non-Inuit company has sold an Inuit design.
They should give proper credit to Inuit artisans.
The president of an organization representing Inuit women says Southern companies using Inuit designs should do more to support the cultures they're taking from.
They should consult with organizations before even developing anything.
Consumers should be asking themselves, like, is this authentic? And if it's not authentic, what are the ethics of me purchasing this?
Mackay hopes they do, and he's not the only one. The petition calling on Tot Chop to stop selling its knives now has over 200 signatures. Natalie Pressman, CBC News, Yellowknife.
It's a familiar problem. You've got a beaver, and it's not really working out. Familiar? The nibbling, dam-building beast is causing issues. Up next, though, a tale of a pair of problem rodents who are providing a solution. Next.
I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Applications are now open for CBC's Indigenous Pathways to Journalism program. This paid 9-month learning and development opportunity supports Indigenous candidates to really hone their skills as storytellers. Indigenous Pathways provides journalism training, career development support, and work experience. Applicants do not require journalism education or experience to apply. Learn more at cbc.ca/pathways.
They're as Canadian as you can get. Got a nickel? There's the beaver.
If you're hunkering for a snack, how about a beaver tail?
The logo of the Hudson's Bay Company. You got it, as a beaver.
And it turns out one person's problem beaver is another person's beaver solution.
Now the tale, pun completely intended, of some beavers relocated and what their new job is.
This project started in 2021. There was a whole bunch of emerging sort of science and literature coming out of the US showing the benefits of beavers for ecosystems and salmon. And so we decided to build some human-made versions of beaver dams called beaver dam analogs. And then we reintroduced beavers to them for the first time last year. I trapped these beavers a couple of weeks ago.
A nuisance animal is always in the eye of the beholder that doesn't want them where they want, whatever they want. And these property owners were upset with the beavers on their property for chewing on trees and flooding part of their property where they didn't want a pond.
We live trapped them. Eva kept them in captivity at her place, and there was a few minor injuries that they had sustained, and so she had them all fixed up.
You cannot relocate a single beaver because it wouldn't survive. They have to be relocated in either pairs or groups.
So Thor and Edda.
That's right.
Did they have these names before they came here?
No, they were very quiet when they came. They only make a sort of like a whiny baby noise, which is the only noise beavers will make, and usually they do that when they're upset. So we named them in order to be able to tell them apart. It turns out, even though they were live trapped in different spots, they actually know each other, because when we introduce them to each other through a gate where they can't walk through, they can only smell through, they were not showing any aggression. So then I opened the door, let them both in. At first they weren't quite sure who the other beaver was, so they were splashing their tails, diving under, trying to, do the little beaver talker, and they did a little circle. They were circling each other in the round pool, and it looked like sharks.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out who the other one is. And that's when I make sure that I'm ready to interfere if they should actually show aggression, but they didn't do that. Then they figured it out.
We had these beavers, and we found a home for them, and we tagged them this morning, and then took a drive up to the headwaters of one of our major tributaries that's really important for salmon and steelhead, and we put them into an old beaver pond up there, and they looked pretty happy, so it was a good day.
Good day to be beaver.
I know. I have a fun fact about beavers.
Fire away.
Beavers hate running water so much that if you have a speaker and you play the sound of running water, the beaver will build a dam over the speaker to try and block the water. Not very smart, though.
Man, you can look up anything on YouTube. Fun fact, they are the world's second largest rodent.
Wow. Capybara.
There you go.
Number one.
But not in our hearts.
No, beaver's number one in my heart. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
And Janella Hamilton will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right here after the National. Good night.